Yeah.
So we're ensuring that type of a perpetual weakness in all of the areas around Israel in order for Israel to have that sense of security, which then means that for Israel to feel secure, everyone else have to feel insecure.
Trita Parsi, ladies and gentlemen, we are monitoring the situation. First time on the broadcast. Been a fan of your expertise and your takes for quite a while now, and very excited to have you here.
Thank you. Really happy to be with you.
And it's an interesting time to be having this conversation with you. I mean, this is, I would say, a lot of vindication for someone like yourself. A lot of your assessments have borne out, and it's obviously still a horrible time as well. I hope. Do you have any family in Iran?
Plenty of family left in Iran.
Yeah, I hope they're doing all right. I don't know if you've been able to speak with them at all.
Other family members, my parents, aunts, etc., have been able to connect with some. I've tried a few, have not been able to get through. I've been able to talk to a lot of other people in Iran. It seems like it is depending on whether they have functioning VPNs and things of that at this point.
Okay. I'm still trying to hold on one second. I'm still trying to fix this thing real quick. God damn it. What is happening? I don't know why this is so difficult. All right. You know what? We're just going to keep going with the desktop. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So, for those of you who might not know, would you, please introduce yourself? You're at the Quincy Institute.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Trita Parsi. I'm the executive vice president, one of the co-founders of the Quincy Institute, a think tank in DC that I would say is very different from other think tanks because we are favoring a U.S. foreign policy of military restraint and focus on diplomacy. We want an approach that would completely end our endless wars and dramatically reduce our militarism.
Yeah. One of the only good think tanks. Very few of them in the DC blob, but you guys are certainly there. And you're also obviously unjustly maligned with regular frequency, something I'm quite familiar with myself. Recently, Laura Loomer was demanding your deportation. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around what you represent and who you are, but it's a big part of the reason is because you happen to be Iranian and also anti-interventionist or anti-wars of choice, and have a long career of consistently advocating for such things, which I guess before we get to the imminent situation, the ceasefire, is it happening? Is it not happening? One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, do you feel like there is a real shift in the collective conscious in the Western world, and especially in the United States of America, about our foreign entanglements? Do you feel like there's a new wave of anti-war advocates, even if they're not necessarily going out and protesting, even though they certainly did during the Gaza genocide?
So I think that's a really interesting question because in some ways we've had counter waves as well. So for instance, I mean, the reason why Quincy could have been founded was precisely because there had been the failures of Afghanistan, Iraq, all of those interventions had led to a scenario in which there was a significant degree of lack of confidence in the direction of American foreign policy, an elite consensus that had also had kind of collapsed. And that opened up the window in which you could push through new ideas and new frameworks, new entire paradigms of foreign policy. So when we were founded in 2019, we were definitely riding on a wave in which it was clear that new thinking was needed. And some of it was actually because of Trump. In our view, Trump won was not a break with American foreign policy. Trump won was a caricature of what American foreign policy always had been. And in some ways, it became much clearer to a larger number of people that you're right, that actually is what our foreign policy has been. It's been shrouded in all of this beautiful language to make us think that it wasn't. But in reality, it's just naked now. And that gave us a major boost. But then you had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, in which suddenly a lot of folks were like, well, there's another bad guy on the international scene. And then they were just rushing back into militancy. And that's not to defend Russia. I think that was an illegal invasion. Things needed to be done to
Yeah.
prevent that. But the manner that the Biden administration went about it, I think, was highly problematic. There was almost no diplomacy. Prior to the invasion, Biden had numerous conversations with Putin, but he never put NATO expansion on the table to see if that actually could have prevented the war. And in retrospect, we also now have some of his senior people from the NSC coming out and saying, yes, if we had done that either then or in April when negotiations were taking place between Russia and Ukraine, we could have prevented a war. We could have prevented hundreds of thousands of deaths. Back then, we were advocating for that. We were advocating for diplomacy, and we got maligned, ruthlessly by a lot of folks who earlier on we thought that perhaps they also had kind of seen the light and were turning against the militarism, but they rushed straight back into it. Now I think we're in another wave in which, again, because of another failed war, another war of choice, we're seeing that folks are once again realizing we really got to change our foreign policy. This is not acceptable, particularly now when you have a candidate that actually won his election twice based on rallying around ending forever wars and maligning the rest of the Republican Party for having gone along with it. And yet he himself is now someone who not only has started this war, he's done a regime change in Venezuela. He's threatened to annex Greenland and potentially even Canada. So I think there's a reaction to that now that is coming. And part of the challenge in all of that, Hasan, is that so far, most of the waves that we are riding on in which, opportunities are being created to push for a better line is coming not as a result of us proactively being able to create those opportunities, but these opportunities are being created because the other side, the primicists, the militants are actually failing in their projects and committing more and more mistakes.
Yeah. Speaking of that, obviously, one of the major mistakes so far has been this quagmire that we found ourselves in Iran. Now, it's not a secret that both Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli foreign policy has always wanted to get the United States of America and the administration to play ball with them to finally go to war with Iran. It kind of feels like, and I want to hear your perspective on this, it kind of feels like the Israeli objectives here were somewhat at odds with the American objectives. The broader American objectives are regime change, have a pliant regime or a pliant government that will play ball with the United States of America, whereas Israel's objectives here broadly seem to me to revolve around complete destabilization, creating a failed state in Iran, regardless of what the impact might look like in the aftermath of the balkanization, fomenting ethnic tensions and making sure that there's never a sovereign state there, or even a American puppet state there that could inevitably turn on Israel once again as it goes along with his greater Israel project. Do you agree with that assessment? Do you have any input on that?
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. Let me add perhaps a bit of detail on it. I think from the US standpoint, for Trump's standpoint, he thought that this was going to be an easy victory. He would either get the collapse of the Iranian regime or there would be a capitulation, perhaps the Venezuela scenario in which someone else would emerge from within that system that would take over and would essentially be a pliant ally of the United States. That is not the Israeli objective. The Israeli objective always was to essentially establish a balance in the region that gives Israel complete maneuverability and dominance. And that means that they're less concerned about the nature of the regime and more concerned about their capabilities that Iran has. I wrote my dissertation on Israeli-Iran relations, and I remember in one of my trips to Israel, I had this conversation, this interview with an Israeli general who said, look, Iran and Israel used to be friends, and that's true from the 50s and 60s and onwards. But then Iran turned into an enemy. It is possible that Iran turns into a friend again, but after that, it can turn into an enemy once more. And as a result, Israel's focus is going to be on the capabilities and capacity of Iran rather than on the nature. So it doesn't matter if it's suddenly a pliant regime there, because the fear is that regime may fall. It will be replaced with another regime. And if the country then is in good shape, has the capabilities, has a strong military, that could be a major challenge to Israel's domination. And as a result, they've been going, and we can see that very clearly in their idea of how this war is won. It's just about degrading as much as possible, bomb them back to the Stone Age, and then, if you need to, in a year or 2 years, you bomb them again. This is what they are pursuing against almost all of their immediate neighbors. In Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, we've seen it. They call it mowing the lawn. It's extremely dehumanizing.
Yeah.
But this is, from the standpoint of having either not wanting to have peace with the neighbors or given up on the idea that it's even possible, then this becomes the next best thing. You just constantly mow the lawn every couple of months or years and make sure that no one in the region or no combination of countries in the region can pose that challenge to you. Now, as this continues, it nevertheless puts Israel in a perpetual state of warfare, not just with its immediate neighbors, but increasingly with more and more states. Iran was a challenge. It is at war with Iran now, hoping to degrade it, set it back a couple of decades, not have to worry about it. And the minute it looked as if it was being successful with Iran, guess what happened? Suddenly in Israel, you had started to have more and more commentaries from senior people, former prime ministers saying that Turkey is the next target.
Yeah.
Turkey is now the most dangerous country in the region. Erdogan is the most dangerous person in the region. And the very same type of a campaign of painting Turkey as a source of instability, the most dangerous country in the region, unchecked, it's a threat to Western civilization. All of those things that you started to see in the early 1990s vis-a-vis Iran, you're now starting to see them vis-a-vis Turkey. And it shows you that there's no end to this type of policy. If you adopt this type of a security doctrine, you're constantly going to be at war. Now, if that's a choice the Israelis want to make for themselves, I guess they have the right to make that choice. But who's underwriting that choice? It is the United States, because Israel is not a country powerful enough to be able to sustain that type of a policy. The only reason why it can be sustained is because of a constant level of military, political, diplomatic, and economic support from the United States. In fact, it's written into American law. We have in the United States a law that says that Israel has to have the qualitative strategic edge in the region, that we make sure that no countries in the region get the best type of weapons. The best type of weapons the U.S. produces goes to Israel, and everyone else gets a second or third rate kind of weapons in order to ensure that we sustain Israel's strategic qualitative edge.
Yeah, we also set back other regional actors that we have security cooperative agreements with, like Lebanon. Lebanon mysteriously doesn't have any anti-air defense systems. And in this day and age, I feel like it's impossible to maintain any sort of sovereignty without anti-air defense systems. But then you realize what Israel is doing in southern Lebanon right now, and you understand exactly why America has refused to ensure that the Lebanese standing military has any sort of serious capacity to purge invading forces, because that invading force is always going to be Israel.
Indeed. And also take a look at what the U.S.'s posture in Lebanon has been. The U.S. has agreed to and pushed with the Israelis that the Lebanese government needs to disarm Hezbollah. And in order to do so, the U.S. has been willing to help the Lebanese army become powerful enough to take on Hezbollah, but not powerful enough to be able to deter an Israeli attack.
Yeah.
So we're ensuring that type of a perpetual weakness in all of the areas around Israel in order for Israel to have that sense of security, which then means that for Israel to feel secure, everyone else have to feel insecure.
Yeah. So let's talk about the military objectives here, right? The United States of America, led by Donald Trump, has had a lot of inconsistent messages on why this war was supposed to be waged. On day one, they said it was because Israel was going to attack with or without us, and therefore we had to go in and do a first strike through perfidy once again, just like what took place in the 12-day war. The Omani negotiators came out on U.S. television and openly explained that Iran had conceded on some of these maximalist demands surrounding the enriched uranium and where to put the enriched uranium, which Iran has consistently utilized as a mechanism for leverage in an effort to not necessarily develop nukes, which they clearly had a fatwa over and had no interest in doing, but instead as a way to bargain against the sanctions that were implemented on Iran. And there obviously was the success of the JCPOA, which Donald Trump famously destroyed once he was in office. There was only one party that was obviously unfavorable to the JCPOA, and that was Israel. And they let their criticisms be known and be heard. And plenty of Democrats in Congress were also antagonistic to Barack Obama's foreign policy there because they also were beholden to the interests of Israel. Now, one of those objectives was taking out the enriched uranium from Isfahan, which is where we suspect the 500 kilograms, I believe, of like nuclear grade enriched uranium is. Another military objective was to deteriorate the strike capabilities of Iran. That was also part of the negotiations process as well. The idea that they had to limit their ballistic munitions strike capabilities to 200 kilometers, suspiciously outside of the range of Israel and Tel Aviv. And they failed to do that. In the process, Iran also closed up the Strait of Hormuz, which 20% of the entire globe's energy passes through. This is something that they had the capacity to do for decades, for 47 years, is part of the reason why America was worried about what could happen in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. And yet they had never done this, with some exceptions, I guess, with the Iran-Iraq War. And they failed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz by force. Now Iran is collecting tolls passing through the strait, $2 million in Chinese yuan in tolls that they're going to be separating that they're going to be sharing with Oman as well, according to their assessment. And they continuously have pummeled not only the Gulf states that have American bases and also have been playing a role in striking Iranian targets, and also Israel as well. We don't know exactly what the damage to Israel has looked like. But all of this has been a spectacular failure, which leads to where we're at now. Yesterday, Donald Trump said in the morning that he was going to do genocide. He was going to eliminate the entire Iranian civilization. He was going to snuff them out. And then by nighttime, he backed away from that. And we found out that on background that they were actually petitioning for this ceasefire. They were actively trying to get this ceasefire. The Americans were, contrary to how they've postured so far. Do you feel like that was because they have failed to achieve their military objectives? And where do we go from here? Sorry, it's a long question, but I wanted to give a little bit background to my audience as well.
No, I think there's no doubt that it is the failure of this entire mission that has led to a scenario in which the United States very aggressively was trying to get a ceasefire. I mean, in fact, if Trump could have, he would have ended the war 3-4 weeks ago and just left, but he couldn't, because the Iranians had leverage. They had the control of this Strait of Hormuz. They could continue to strike at GCC states. They could continue to strike at Israel. So, he had ended up going into something in which he no longer was in control of. And pressure was used to get other countries on board and helping get some sort of a ceasefire. And when you take a look at what the parameters of the ceasefire are, it is essentially allowing the Iranians to continue to collect these tolls, which is a tacit agreement that they are now in control of the straits and that the US can't do much about that. And secondly, the basis of the negotiations is going to be some variation of the 10-point plan that the Iranians put forward, not the 15-point plan that was essentially the terms of Iran's capitulation that the United States put forward. Now, there may be some disagreements and lack of accurate information of what exactly is in those 10 points. The one that I have used when doing some of my analysis has been based on what was available publicly, but it's very likely that in the course of exchanges of messages and indirect negotiations, those points may have been amended somewhat. But I think the gist of it is probably remaining the same. And Trump even said that this is a reasonable or a workable basis for negotiations. So truly, Trump went forward, issued these genocidal threats, I think very well aware and inclined to come to an agreement by evening time, and that would be a caving by and large to what the Iranian position was. But in order to kind of cover that up, he was issuing these threats in order to make it was the opposite, as if the Iranians were coming and essentially bending the knee to him.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's going to be important for any world leader to have a narrative of victory, but even more so for a superpower to make sure that it doesn't lose face. It's always going to be the case, probably more so when someone with the psychology and the personality of Trump. The question now, of course, is this going to work? What could make it work? What could not make it work? A critical element in the Iranian 10-point plan, which we know is true because they're repeating it publicly, is that they're demanding that Israel is also interest in the ceasefire, not just vis-a-vis Iran, but also vis-a-vis Gaza and Lebanon.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's three reasons why the Iranians are doing this. The first one is because they have to show that solidarity and they cannot abandon Hezbollah. There's a perception that Iran abandoned the other groups in the axis of resistance in 2024. And now Hezbollah actually came to Iran's aid in this war, and Iran cannot afford to look as if it is abandoning Hezbollah. That's one. Secondly, I think there's also a recognition on the Iranian side that as long as Israel continues to bomb its neighbors, and Hezbollah in particular, there is a risk that that war will once again flare up further and bring Iran into it, as it already has twice. And if you go back to October 7th, 2023, and a lot of the commentary that came out back then, and including what the Biden administration said, they said, crucial to make sure that this war does not get regionalized. It's been totally regionalized now after the Israelis and the US attacked Iran. So the Iranians recognize if that continues in Lebanon, this war is going to come back to them at some point. And they're not looking for a ceasefire. They're looking for an enduring end to the war. The third point may actually be the most important. This demand is there to test whether the United States is willing and capable of reigning in Israel. Because if it isn't, then what is the value of a ceasefire with the United States?
Yeah.
Because if Israel can restart these wars and the United States is incapable of staying out when Israel decides that a war needs to be initiated, what's the point of having a ceasefire with the United States? And I think this is very crucial because the Iranians have reached a point in which they actually don't necessarily want a ceasefire. They're not trusting these agreements. They're trusting that there should be enough deterrence so that it actually deters the US and Israel from attacking, rather than there being an agreement that is the foundation for a longer term peace.
Yeah. So let's talk about that element, right? I've said from the beginning that given the diverging or conflicting interests of Israel and the United States of America, regardless of how both parties have communicated their desires, America has to rein Israel in. And this is not just the Iranian demand. This is just what has to happen in this situation, considering that they haven't been able to accomplish their military objectives. Do you feel like that's possible at all? Because since the so-called ceasefire was implemented, obviously Iran continued strikes as well on Tel Aviv. That could have been because of the way that the Mosaic defense has been structured. It's decentralized. Or it could have been for some other reason. We don't know. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. But also, Israel started bombing other parts of Lebanon, as they are known to do, in, I think, a direct effort to spoil what this ceasefire could potentially look like, because it was not a secret that they were very frustrated. As a matter of fact, there's some reporting that came out that suggested that Israel did not even know that this ceasefire negotiation was on the verge of being signed until the very last moment, and they were very frustrated by it. I mean, I saw Hebrew Twitter last night; they were going crazy over it, right? So do you feel like America will actually try to restrain Israel? Where do we go from here? Is the ceasefire gone? Is it over? What do you think?
So on the first question, I think it's really crucial. It's like, can the United States do this? Can they stop Israel? I think it's actually a real problem that we've reached a point in which the superpower asks, can it stop
Yeah.
the country whose defense and military industry is completely dependent on the United States? The reality is obvious to me. Obviously, the United States can. It's a question of whether the president is willing to pay the political price for implementing that and pushing through that, given the fact that there's going to be a lot of resistance. You're going to have to deal with a lot of lobbies, et cetera, that are putting Israeli interests arguably in front of US interests, et cetera. That's what the real issue is, not that the US cannot do it. Because if the United States actually says we cannot do it, which was exactly what the Biden administration proudly said, I mean, what kind of superpower are you if that is the case? I mean, to me, it's just stunning. And if you listen to Joe Kent, who just resigned from his position in as the head of Counterterrorism Center, I mean, he's laying out details exactly what the United States needs to do, the specific things that the United States needs to take away from Israel as part of this ongoing support to make it clear to the Israelis that the US is absolutely serious. And we do have examples of that in the past. We have the very famous example of how Reagan told Menachem Begin, you got to get out of Lebanon because the TV images of the massacres that Israel was causing back in 1982 was reaching American audiences, upsetting a lot of upsetting Reagan himself. And he got him on the phone and he said, you got to stop doing, you got to pull out. And when Menachem Begin pushed back, Reagan essentially said, well, then you're not going to get I think it was the F-16s at the time that the Israelis were buying. And, 20 minutes later, Menachem Begin calls back and says that we're pulling out. So obviously this can be done. In fact, it was done just a couple of months ago by Trump himself.
Yeah.
After the Israelis struck Doha, he really was under pressure from a lot of the states in the region that came together and demanded this of him. He told the Israelis that they have to stop. And he even brought Netanyahu to the Oval Office, had him read an apology to the Emir of Qatar. And then later on, when the Israelis denied that this happened, the White House released the footage showing that this was being done.
Yeah.
What Trump has failed to do is to sustain that pressure. It cannot be episodic. If you want this to stop, you have to put it on, and then you have to sustain it to make sure that the Israelis do not find a way out and then start a war or put that pressure on you again.
Absolutely. They do. America does have this power, and rarely choose to enforce it, especially under the Trump regime. We have we've, I think, changed the dynamic in this relationship. I like to say that we put Israel in the driver's seat of our MENA policy specifically, and it's obvious that it's no longer just a special ally status, but instead has a commanding role in what American foreign policy looks like, considering that the GCC states are far more valuable to the petrodollar, far more reliable as far as trillions of dollars of investment into American companies. The fact that Israel can so easily throw them under the bus and turn these American bases into missile sponges, pretty much, and shake up that relationship so dramatically implies that America's willing to take a loss here, a spectacular loss, both billions of dollars of equipment that they've lost in the process, but also a loss in its force projection capabilities, which I think are going to be far more consequential. I'll give you a perspective that I doubt that you've heard from anyone, though. I think that America getting a bloody nose in this situation is not necessarily a bad thing, but a good one, because I think it will force the United States of America to be a little bit more restrained in our endless endeavors of empire and imperialism. And I think that's ultimately going to lead to a hardened multipolarity that will force America to reconsider how aggressive we are in our force projection around the globe, and maybe even recycle some of the endless amounts of dollars that we spend on our military-industrial complex, and instead, hopefully, you spend that on ourselves, on our fixing our potholes, hardening our infrastructure, maybe even Medicare for all, things of that nature. That's my perspective. I want to hear what you think about that, and then
so look.
The other question, the follow-up question to that will also be, do you feel like this is different than the military quagmire in Iran, in Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and why?
Yeah. So on your first question, it actually goes back to what I mentioned to you earlier on, that the kind of openings and waves in favor of a more restrained foreign policy has come as a result of the failure of these wars. So that's the trend that we have seen. I mean, it is the Iraq war and Afghanistan war that just really created a massive opening that led to Trump channeling that anti-war sentiments on the American right in 2015 and winning on it, even though all of the pundits in Washington who were all, embedded in this Washingtonian thinking of things thought that that was a huge political mistake. Turns out there was an absolutely winning card for Trump. But here's what I would have much preferred. Much preferred that the United States, instead of getting a bloody nose, actually proactively adjusted its foreign policy in the right direction, not as a result of a mistake, but as a result of a wise, forward-looking decision, recognizing the nature of power and that we are not going to be unipolar forever. We have stopped being that. And as a result, if we want to be able to sustain a strong global position in the long term, we actually do need to have an approach that is far more careful, far less reckless, and far more focused on American interest and the American people, rather than all of this money that we're spending, 750 bases around the world. The other country that has a lot of bases around the world outside of their own territory is Russia and China. Russia has 11. China has 1 or 2.
Yeah.
We're at 750.
It's not comparable.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just not comparable. The cost of that, the manner in which it dictates the direction of American foreign policy towards more militarism, because that's the tools that we have. We have more lawyers at Pentagon than we have actually diplomats at the State Department. What does that say about our priorities? And what does that say that with those priorities, could we easily shift in a different direction? So I think it's going to be very hard. And I'm fearful, though, that the real shift will not come unless we have really big mistakes, bigger mistakes than this one. Because at the end of the day, if I want to say something positive or give Trump credit for something, I would give him credit for taking this deal and getting out of this war. I think the outcome of this negotiation will be a failed outcome. I don't think the likelihood is that great that it will come to an agreement. I think the most likely scenario is that it will be a non-agreed status quo that will come out of this, in which the two sides actually don't make an agreement, but nevertheless, the US doesn't go back into the war. The Iranians continue to control the straits, but they don't get the sanctions relief that they're looking for.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the two sides are too far away from each other to come to an agreement, but they nevertheless have a common interest in not going back into full-scale war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not a great outcome at the end of the day. It may not be very stable. But most other American presidents, and we have now seen it, once faced with a debacle like this, what do? They just kick the can down the road. They just keep on telling the American people victory is just a couple of weeks or months away. And then 20 years later, we have ended up spending $2 trillion changing the government of Afghanistan from the Taliban back to the Taliban.
Yeah.
So pulling out is costly, but it's actually far less costly if you do it now than you wait a couple of more years.
And to the second question, I'm going to repeat it because it was very long. Do you feel like this is a different scenario than the purposely long and convoluted military quagmires that we found ourselves in with Afghanistan, Iraq, and even Vietnam as well? Because that didn't actually put a dent in America's force projection capabilities. And if so, why? Because I do believe that. I think that this is different because there's a lot more focus on what's going on. And this is the first time we've actually dealt with a foreign adversary that had the capacity to strike at profit centers, in particular, both in the GCC and also in Israel, and shut down the Strait of Hormuz and create a global panic around the energy markets.
So I think you're onto something there, because what you have in Afghanistan and in Iraq was, in Iraq, the United States won the war militarily in 3 weeks, right? And then the United States lost the peace. Same thing is true in Afghanistan. The Taliban were defeated, and then they came back because the United States could not stabilize the country. It could not help set up a new functioning government. Here, we're talking about, frankly, a military defeat. Not in the sense in a direct, battle, but because the Iranians managed to play the asymmetric card very cleverly and very effectively and squeeze the global economy that would just put the United States in a terrible situation and other countries in even worse situations. And as a result, we are where we are right now. So in that sense, it is very different. Saddam Hussein did not manage to bloody America's nose. Iraq and the instability that followed did bloody America's nose. But that wasn't a military defeat. It was a political and diplomatic defeat.
Yeah. So I guess what do you foresee taking place beyond this this situation where both parties don't actually align, but like the battle lines are drawn regardless? America fails to achieve his military objectives. It clearly is incapable of successfully attriting Iranian strike capabilities, given the asymmetric warfare that they've conducted. Do you see any stability here? What do you perceive China's role to be here as well? Because they are a major partner to the Gulf states, and they do get a lot of their energy from the Gulf states. They were capable of crafting a successful agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the past as well.
So Hasan, sorry, I do have to leave after this answer. I have another meeting at 4:00, but I think that's a very important question. No, of course, my pleasure. And I wish I had more time. China's role in all of this is going to be very interesting. There's a simplistic view in which, whenever the United States shoots itself in the foot, that this benefits China. And to a certain extent, that's absolutely true. But China is also in need of stability, and is particularly in need of stability in the Persian Gulf. So it is not happy to see an instability that has almost doubled the price of oil, creates all of these different challenges. And it could get much worse if this war had continued. So those are very worrisome signs for the Chinese as well. And it does appear, I haven't gotten this confirmed, that towards the end of these talks, the Chinese did weigh in with the Iranians to get them to agree to this, even though it's mostly on their terms. It was still a debate because, as you know, the Iranians agreed to a ceasefire back in June that Trump asked them for. And there's been a lot of commentary in Iran and a lot of rethinking in Iran's security establishment, in which the dominant narrative now is that it was a mistake for them to agree to that ceasefire. They should have continued the war then. And that has now also reflected the debate in Iran in the last couple of 24, 48 hours. And the Chinese appear to have weighed in and successfully gotten them to agree to this. Now, in the scenario that I see most likely, again, not preferable in any way, shape, or form, it will be not an entirely stable situation, but also not an entirely unstable situation. Because, again, as long as the common interest from both Iran and the US is not to get back into a full-scale war, they will probably try to avoid that. You will see the Israelis continue, but I don't think they can continue the war that long without American help. So instead, it will shift towards more of a dirty war, assassinations, and things of that nature. There will be great difficulties between Iran and the GCC. They have a lot of mistrust and anger on both sides to overcome. Obviously, a lot of the GCC states are very angry of having been hit as hard as they have been by Iran. Iran is very angry because it believes and has some evidence that many of them did allow the United States to use their airspace and Israel and territory to do attacks against Iran. And mindful of the fact that this was not just ordinary warfare, there was a lot of war crimes. It has, really deepened the anger on the Iranian side. In the best case scenario, the region manages to find its own path towards a new security architecture in which they manage and shoulder the responsibility of security in the region themselves, rather than relying on outside sources and forces. That ultimately, the latter part of just constantly having an external guarantor of security, tends to actually create pockets of security, but a lot of instability at the same time.
All right. Trita Parsi, everybody. Thank you so much. Is there anything
so much
you would like to promote before I let you go?
Love for the folks to follow me on Twitter at tparsi or at Substack at Trita Parsi. And you can also go and check out the website of the Quincy Institute, which is quincyinst.org.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Real honor to have you on the broadcast.
Likewise.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Bye.